Thank you, Sarah. Well, I'm excited to be here. I understand there's just been so many panels and so many discussions and that there's so much energy out there. So I'm excited to share a few thoughts and then engage in a real discussion with you all. So for more than 20 years, as you just heard, Teach for America has been working to recruit and develop transformational leaders for ensuring that all kids have an equal shot. And for the last few years, as you heard, Teach for All has been supporting social entrepreneurs around the world who are doing the same within their countries, now in 30 countries and growing. Let's see if I can get this to work. And for 20 years, our motives and methods have been questioned and resisted. As you can see, we still haven't won over the critics. Why does Teach for America continue to go at it? Why are social entrepreneurs all around the world so passionate about this? And why is Teach for All working to accelerate their impact around the world? Let me try to explain. So, all over the world, socioeconomic background predicts educational outcomes. This is true in my home state here, the state of Texas. Consider the disparities between the attainment of kids in Highland Park, where I grew up, and in other communities very, very close. In my small school district, which served a community that called itself the bubble for its complete lack of any form of diversity and disadvantage, more than 90% of the students go on to complete college. But in Dallas Independent School District, just a few miles away, 14% do. The kids with no safety net and the least privileges are set up with the least opportunity to access the kind of fulfilling, comfortable, personal and professional lives that would ultimately give their kids some form of safety net. It's a deeply unjust situation. And it's true all around the world. Where a child is born determines the kind of education they'll receive and ultimately their options in life. Growing up in rural China, Joe has just a 3% chance of going to college. In India, close to 60% of kids like Sana don't complete primary school. And half of all students like Manuel in Argentina will drop out of high school. What is also true all around the world is that education can transform lives, communities, and countries. If all students in low-income communities left school with basic reading skills, 171 million people would be lifted out of poverty. Improved educational outcomes lead to improved health care, human rights, social and political systems, and overall economic conditions. As we've worked to fix education as a way of helping kids break the cycle of poverty, advocates and reformers have held up one silver bullet after another to solve the inequity problem. In the US, I could probably go back and name each of the last 24 years for the reform that we've put all our money on in that given year. Believe it or not, if you go back far enough to when I first started, we thought project-based curriculums would solve the problem. That was the silver bullet solution when I was just getting started, and it was the theme and full focus of every single education conference. Successively, we've had the year of give every parent a voucher, make every school a charter, give every kid a computer, and most recently, fix the teachers, and we'll fix the problem. In my travels, I have discovered that the search for silver bullet solutions is actually a worldwide phenomenon. All over the world, we want to solve this problem tomorrow, and we keep trying one thing after another in search of a quick fix. But unfortunately, this doesn't work. There is no one silver bullet. While vouchers can give low-income parents freedom from failing schools, we've seen that they won't solve the problem until there are more options where the parents can use the vouchers. So voucher systems in places like Milwaukee and Washington, D.C. have seen arguably incremental, but certainly only very limited changes in outcomes. Charter laws have enabled some of the highest performing schools, but charter laws themselves aren't enough, which is why on average, charter schools aren't doing much better than traditional schools, if any better at that. Some are doing a lot worse. Technological innovations can be a powerful tool, but as we'll see in a minute, unless they're used in the service of transformational classrooms and schools, they simply can't be a replacement for anything. All of these things can be part of the solution, but none of them is a panacea. This makes sense because the problem we're addressing is incredibly complex and multifaceted. It exists because the most marginalized kids face many extra challenges that more privileged kids don't face. They show up at schools without the resources and capacity necessary to meet their extra needs and help them excel. And this cycle is perpetuated by a set of policies and mindsets. The implication of this is that we need many interventions. A single intervention, a single hammer, cannot possibly overcome all those systemic challenges faced by marginalized kids. You may tackle one challenge, but another will pop up to replace it. It's like playing whack-a-mole. To reverse the cycle, let me make sure that went. To reverse the cycle, we need to start by minimizing the pressure on our most marginalized kids through taking on the challenges outside of school, improving economies, strengthening social services, improving healthcare and nutrition, providing strong early education. We also need to strengthen the capacity of schools serving the most disadvantaged kids by lengthening the school days, strengthening their leadership and teams, augmenting the counseling and healthcare and social services resources that they can provide. We need to change policies so that they support all those interventions. We need to change mindsets so that all of our interventions are built on the idea that all children can succeed and on a grounded understanding of all that needs to be done. There are lots and lots of things that we need to do to solve this problem. When we act with a recognition that success requires doing lots of things well, we succeed. Consider this tale of two schools. In 2006, the School of the Future opened in Philadelphia to great fanfare. Every classroom had cutting-edge design and technology. Every student was given a laptop. A big technology company invested $60 million in this school. 3 years later, this school was actually underperforming the Philadelphia public schools, which is a rare feat. By 2009, only 8% of the school's 11th graders were deemed proficient in math, compared to 32% of the students citywide. Only 23% were proficient in reading. I visited the school that year, and I was truly sad to sit in the back of a room, and I actually counted. I mean, I made sure to get my facts right. Every single kid in that room was engaged in one of three things. There were two trying to fix the computer, like, you know, let me try to restart. There were a bunch who were IMing their friends, and there were a bunch who were surfing the internet, while a teacher stood in front of the room and tried to talk very loudly to get the kids' attention. In the 5 years since then, thankfully, the School of the Future has made strides in student achievement. On average, the students are now doing better than those in other schools in Philadelphia. And it's because system leaders realized that technology would help, but only if the school's foundations, its leadership, its culture, its instructional team and program were strong. Now, the second school was opened by Brett Kimmel in Washington Heights. It's called the Washington Heights Expeditionary Learning School in New York. And the school, which is a public open enrollment school, it's not a charter school, it serves about 650 Hispanic students from the surrounding neighborhood. They're in grades 6 through 12. 100% of them qualify for free and reduced lunch. And the sixth graders come in about 2 years behind in reading and math. Well, Brett invested a huge amount in recruiting and developing an incredibly strong team of teachers. He worked with that team to create a strong instructional plan and a strong culture of achievement, thinking through every single aspect of how this school would operate to reinforce high expectations. He then did a lot of other things. He partnered with a lot of outside organizations to provide extra supports for kids, to give them access to the kind of leadership development opportunities that much more privileged kids have routine access to provide additional one-on-one tutoring, to provide exposure to career options, and then to provide, once the kids graduate, ongoing supports for college access and persistence. His team began by thinking about the outcomes that they wanted to achieve, and then they went about doing all the things necessary to actually reach those outcomes. Well, in 2012, they graduated their first class of 12th graders with a 78% graduation rate and an 86% college enrollment persistence rate. Every year, the students, and you can see this in that picture, parade down the street from the school to the post office to mail their college applications and try to create a culture in the community of, it's possible to go to college. But, spending time with Brett and his team reveals just how much goes into this. This is an incredible obsession for a whole bunch of people, and they know there's no one thing, that this is going to be about 100 different solutions. There are no shortcuts. Now, can you imagine having whole systems of schools like this one and affecting lots of other necessary improvements that would mitigate the challenges of poverty and make the jobs of schools like this much easier? That's what we need to do. But how? How are we going to do all that? Who is going to do all that? This is what motivates those of us at Teach for America and all these social entrepreneurs around the world who are absolutely determined to bring this to their countries. It's what motivates Teach for All to say we've got to accelerate the impact of this model all around the world. Unfortunately, it's a very, very rare country that channels its top talent towards expanding opportunity for its most marginalized kids. While we're making some strides, at least here in the US and in the UK, where Teach First launched more than 10 years ago, top employers of our most educated college graduates are still in finance, consulting, and business services. That's what we're working to change. At Teach for America and Teach for All, we are working to channel more of our world's most precious resource, our most talented human resources, against this problem, and then to cultivate their ongoing leadership for the many, many changes that we need to see. We're working to inspire more people like Brett Kimmel, who joined Teach for America back in 1992, to take up this charge. This means recruiting very aggressively on college campuses and among young professionals all around the world, and asking for a 2-year commitment so that those individuals with the most other options will actually consider taking this step. It means investing a whole lot in these teachers through intensive pre-service training and, most importantly, 2 years of ongoing professional development. And it means doing a lot to work to foster their ongoing leadership as a force for change. It means we love it when these folks stay in the classroom after their 2 years, but that we also know that all of them can't if we're going to solve this problem. Because we need great teachers, but we also need better curricular standards and teacher training and school leader development. We need more community organizing and community development. We need better social services, we need economic development, we need early education, and a whole bunch of other things. It's going to take a massive force of people, talented folks, to take on such a massive, complicated problem. And it's going to take them working from every direction in pretty much every community around the world. Who's going to do all that needs to be done? All over the world, the partners of Teach for All are working to grow the force of the people who will. And we ourselves in this room are a big part of the solution as well. This room is full of people who each hold a piece of the puzzle. Let's stop spending our time debating whether we should be increasing the pool of folks who are out there working to try to improve things for the world's most marginalized kids, and instead join forces to help those kids fulfill their potential and become the leaders our world needs. Thank you. So I'd love to just engage in a discussion with you all, and find out what's on your mind and what your biggest questions are. Do we have a way of, yes, we have a microphone that's coming to the middle.
Hi, Wendy, this is Adit. Thank you for a great keynote. On Monday, we all heard criticism, as you probably heard already, from Dan Ravitch about the lack of training. I'm a big fan and supporter of TFA for what you do in the United States and the world in cultivating change agents in the education system here and everywhere. What is your view about the training aspect? Like, why can't we take this amazing kids and maybe invest in a year of them participating in the system before they actually teach? And you know all that. Maybe you can share with us your thoughts about that. The next question is, why are you criticizing education technology and not incorporating it in a more meaningful way into the training and the making of the next generation change agents of education?
Great. So to the first question, well, this is interesting timing because Teach for America's co-CEOs announced just last night that they're going to pilot this program so that when people apply before their junior year, they can actually opt into a program like a year-long teacher ed program that will still better prepare them.
My daughter just applied to it.
Good, great. That said, so first of all, Teach for America's training is as long as it is because of resources and kind of, practical constraints. And interestingly, I mean, we put the vast majority of our resources where the research shows that we should, like into the ongoing support and professional development that teachers get once they start teaching. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the program. Like, yes, it starts with a summer-long intensive pre-service program, but it really extends. I mean, we have a luxury that schools of ed don't have, in that we have an ongoing relationship with our teachers, meaning like we cluster them in schools, we have coaches working out in the schools, so we can actually provide a very grounded, ongoing, we can put our resources into providing a training that meets the particular needs of the particular teachers in their particular classes. And in fact, the research would show that this approach actually works well. I mean, we must be we've got to be the most studied teacher ed program in the country. And if you look at the most rigorous studies, they show that our teachers do, in fact, outperform other beginning teachers in their schools and even other veteran teachers in their schools. I mean, the big study that Mathematica Policy Research just issued earlier in the fall that looked at, it used random assignment. It was gold standard study, randomly assigned kids to classrooms of our math teachers and math teachers in a number of other programs, found that the Teach for America teachers moved their kids 2.6 extra months in a year's time on average. And that's one study. There are numerous studies, and they point to very similar effects. The Teach for All studies, like the first studies of the Enseña Chile program, the Teach for India program, also showed positive effects. So I would just say, we feel like we're on a journey. We don't, it's hard to train teachers. We're not saying this is the one way. Every year, Teach for America and all the Teach for All partners step back and throw it up and say, how do we do this better? But at the same time, the research would indicate that we've got the most effective teacher ed program out there right now in terms of the outcomes that it's delivering. So I think it'll be interesting to see the results of the year-long program. We'll see if that impacts effectiveness. Now, in terms of technology, so I actually deeply believe that technology is part of the solution. I mean, it has to be. It's just mind-boggling to think about. You know, you think about how technology has changed the way every company, every organization, and pretty much every sector, right, operates, except ours, like except education. And so you just have to believe, and there's so many ways that we can all imagine that technology could be a huge enabler, just huge, you know? I mean, from everything from enabling parents and kids and teachers to all understand where kids are in relation to performance standards to, you know, obviously using gaming technology that's so absorbing for our kids to actually teach kids academic content. So I personally believe that there are tremendous, tremendous possibilities. But at the same time, I'm under no illusion that that's going to solve the problem. And I can't tell you how many conferences and meetings I've been at where people are, in all seriousness, with great conviction, saying that we're going to solve this problem by giving kids a tablet. And just all of the time that I've spent and that my colleagues through Teach for America and Teach for All have spent working with the most marginalized kids, maybe you could give, I mean, I would be terrified to just give my kids a tablet personally and say, go off and teach yourself, but maybe privileged kids, maybe if they're in the construct of, you know, lots of circumstances, but.
I think my question was more about why aren't you incorporating advanced technology into the learning of your teachers in your corps? And actually do not accept people who cannot really lead project-based, innovative technology classrooms that are really using the best of what you see here, even in this conference, right? Just think about your teachers.
I think our teachers are probably doing at least as much as anyone. I mean, I think we're getting very technology-savvy folks. A lot of them want to use technology to innovate in their classrooms. So I think we're doing actually quite a lot. I mean, if you start talking to the technology innovators out there, I think they'd say, well, the TFA alums and the TFA core members are doing a lot. I think that the challenge is that they're also teaching, and you know, in the U.S. and in some contexts, some of the schools in which we place, despite being very under-resourced communities, actually do have access to technology, but for a lot of them, they just don't have the resources that would enable us to say we're going to put all of our energy, you know, around the training of 11,000 teachers who teach in 48 communities into figuring out how to better equip them to use technology when it's maybe 10% of them who would be able to then access that innovation. So we're doing some things, but it's not the general focus of our effort. Yep, thanks.
Hi, Wendy. My name is Rob McFeely. I want to thank you for all of your work, especially for turning our attention to marginalized populations around the world. So I couldn't help but notice in that slide that you had up there about how interwoven and interconnected this problem is, right? It's not just a question of the quality of the teachers, it's things about healthcare, questions of inequality.
Yep.
And as you were speaking, I'm from New York City, and there's a program there called Venture for America. And a lot of the arguments and comments that we hear, and I heard you say it again today, about many of our young people going into things like consulting and finance and making a shitload more money than I do. To me, it's interesting that there's a lot of conversation around programs to take that talent and otherwise apply it to these problems, right? And I'm wondering, not everyone is a great classroom teacher. I actually got a graduate degree in teaching. I'm not teaching because I'm much better at sitting in front of a computer than in front of a bunch of children. But my question is, the idea of Teach for All and of Teach for America, of taking people, getting them in the classroom, exposing them firsthand to those issues, I'm wondering whether you see any room or potential for something like a more national civil service corps, because when you had that slide up there, something in medicine, healthcare questions, there are a lot of issues that people may leave Teach for America or Teach for All and then go on to address those problems. But I'm wondering whether you see the idea, it's not so much the interest and growth of programs like Teach for America and Venture for America as a sign that there is potentially, at least here in America, a desire to spend some time after university, or potentially instead of university, devoting yourself to more social issues beyond just teaching.
I think that the record of Teach for America is a really pretty, I think it provides a lot of evidence of the power of channeling talent and energy against very pressing societal issues, showing that you can make a real immediate impact, even at a young age, just as those big corporations bet that you can. But then that experience is so transformational, and it will transform every year thereafter. I have to say, like, the very initial concept of TFA was to say, we're going to channel all this energy, into our classrooms in our most under-resourced communities. And we were assuming that what would happen is these teachers were going to see our society's greatest social ills all play out within the four walls of their classrooms. You know, they were going to see their kids facing all these extra challenges because of all these outside forces, and they were going to, you know, experience all that, and then that experience would lead them to go on and fight the huge range of issues. Interestingly, what happened is, you know, our folks realized how much they could do from within schools to take on the huge range of issues. And so 2/3 of them ended up never leaving, which is sort of amazing when you think about it, right? It's like 33,000 TFA alums, and 2/3 of them are still working full-time, long-term in education. And we do ask ourselves some. I mean, while folks question, like, is that enough? Like, should 90% of them or 100% of them stay? We ask ourselves, are enough actually going off and fighting the systemic challenges? So I think both are true. The thing is, we need as many people as we can to stay in education. I mean, we desperately do. There's so much that can be done, and we've all seen that firsthand. But we need a bigger and bigger force of folks so that we can have more and more people taking on all the other systemic issues.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Georgette Yakman. I'm the founder of the SNEAM movement. And first of all, your organization is just amazing. I'm trying to get an international network of teachers where they go through a program like yours, they go through traditional school, and they start building a collective. And I was wondering, you know, beyond people being in your program, what would you maybe recommend for somebody like myself trying to get the collective power of a grassroots movement of educators going? And then also I wanted to commend you for your dual use of technology, in that when we reach our minority students and our inner city kids and our girls, they need to understand tangible technology. These chairs we sit in are just as valuable to understand about and do and work with as the ET and the IT you talked about in addressing that earlier question.
Well, first of all, come talk to us. You know, we do have now not only thousands and thousands and thousands of not even just Teach for America core members, but probably 10,000 Teach for America alumni who are still in the classroom, and now growing numbers of those folks all around the world. And we're looking for ways. I mean, one of the many focuses of, you know, Teach for America's ongoing efforts and the Teach for All program's ongoing efforts is to think about how do we advance the leadership of our alumni, those who are staying in the classroom. How do we support them to actually make their voices heard in policy, to develop themselves professionally, et cetera? Just as we're asking, you know, how do we help those who want to move into school leadership do that? How do we help those who want to run for public office do that? So come talk to us, because maybe we can work together.
Great.
Yeah.
Hi, Wendy. I'm with Ashoka. So I think there's a broad consensus now that there are different models of learning, different ways for young people to learn. And I'm sure a lot of your recent graduates, university graduates, have grown up in an era of the internet, and they see the power of learning everywhere, not just from a set curriculum. Do you think Teach for America will help schools experiment and adopt diverse modes of learning, rather than simply training teachers to teach from curriculum to standards that may be tested? And as you have greater influence globally, you know, I see a lot of videos, you know, showing education in Africa, and these are inspirational videos that are meant to make us feel hopeful that these children are learning. But I actually am quite sad when I see rows and rows of children sitting there just repeating, you know, by rote what the teacher's saying to them, and it's the least inspirational type of education possible. And the developing countries are, I think, looking to the West to copy a lot of these models that may not work for all kids, and especially in a developing country setting. So in terms of your global influence, can you also help model and spread different modes of learning?
I think it's a great question. I mean, I personally could not agree more that we need so much more innovation than we have in just rethinking everything about how kids learn and the structure of school and all. I think it's also, you know, whether or not we have the kind of innovation we need is going to be a function of, you know, of leadership. You know, it really will. It'll be the function of pioneers and then the people who spread the innovations of the pioneers. And what we're trying to do is actually increase the number of folks whose pioneering leadership is actually grounded in an understanding of the actual needs and actual circumstances of the most marginalized kids. It worries me when that's not the case. And so that's exactly, I mean, we've got a lot going on to try to expose not only the teachers, but the alumni of these programs to the possibilities in terms of technology. And again, I kind of encourage you to reach out, because maybe we could get your voice or the voices of others who you think would be really provocative in front of these folks to challenge their own thinking about how to better meet the needs of the marginalized kids they've come to, know and love.
Thank you.
Hey, Wendy. I'm Ryan Carson. I'm the co-founder of a school called Treehouse. We're online. And we've got 70,000 students around the world, and that's great, but I'm a parent as well. And so we've got a 5-year-old at a local public school. So I thought, well, I want to be a better dad and a better member of the community, so I'm going to go in the school and ask the principal how I can help, just as a dad. And I asked the principal if you could wave a magic wand, what are 2 things you'd change about the school? And she said, number 1, she wanted to put a tablet in every student's hands. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know she'd say that. And the second thing, we have a pretty good, diverse student body at that school. And the second thing she said is she feels like she's a pawn caught between the teacher union and the district board, and that she kind of doesn't have any real control to hire or fire teachers that she thinks are good or bad. And I was just wondering if you could give us advice as parents and members of the community. How do we help? Like, what can we do, if anything?
Gosh, let me think about how to answer that. I mean, one thing I would encourage, and then I'll get to my real answer, is I don't know. I feel incredibly privileged in my role to have been able to spend time in, I don't know, at least 100, I'm sure that way underdoes the number, but 100 schools that I think we could fairly call transformational. They're working with kids, not like my own kid, typically they're working with kids who are, living below the poverty line and facing many, many more challenges than my kid does. But I've seen these schools take kids who probably, if you look at the general statistics, 8% of them would get a college degree and put them on track to beating the national average. And when you start spending time in those schools, and I am a parent too, and I spend time with lots of other parents who've had this experience as well, you become really depressed about your own school, because schools are often, they're experiences. Your kids come in, people assume there's going to be a bell curve, Some kids are really going to get it, some kids are sort of going to get it, and some kids are going to really excel, and you're creating an overall environment that's going to be fine. When you find out what these transformational schools are doing, you realize, wow, like what is possible? Like if we actually approach school with that kind of rigor and that kind of discipline, what would be possible for all of our kids? So one thing I would just say is, if you haven't already, which you might have, but I would go spend time in those schools. They are in most communities at this point. You can find a bunch of them in Austin. You can find a bunch of them almost everywhere. And I think it's very illuminating. Then you start talking to the principal and you realize that usually they are benefiting from charter laws that do enable them to pick their own teams. And they've usually taken huge advantage of that by spending enormous amounts of energy in recruiting and developing strong teams. And I think once you understand that, you can be better advocates and allies for that principal, who is very brave to say that, and going to the school board with a bunch of other committed parents and say, let's really talk about what we can do here. So I do think, in education right now, there are a bunch of groups that show up constantly at school boards, and they're usually not parents who are really well informed about the possibilities and truly working for change. So I think there's a huge amount you can do to make a difference.
Cool, thank you.
Oh, hi, my name is Naho, and I work at the venture capital, and I've been looking at edutech, and I really agree that teachers plays a major role. So I want to know, have the training stuff to teachers changed because of the boom of the edutech?
I think, honestly, the teacher training has changed very little in relation to anything, actually, let alone education technology. And in part, I don't think our schools have changed their approach, so the schools of ed haven't truly been called upon to, train their teachers to teach to a different approach. That being said, I kind of want to use this as an opportunity to step back. Like, I think, again, as I said, and I really don't want there to be any confusion, like, I believe we need to just absolutely revolutionize the way we use technology in education. And in fact, I was in a school in Los Angeles that is doing it incredibly well. Like, it's an incredible school. It's a KIPP school, actually, in LA. It's the first kind of blended learning approach KIPP school. And they are maximizing technology. I'm sure they wouldn't say they're maximizing it. I'm sure there are more possibilities, but they're utilizing it heavily. And last I heard, it was one of the top performing KIPP schools. So they are truly figuring out how to utilize it. I use that example because if you took all the technology out, it would still be a really strong school. Like, they have all the foundations in place. And I just can't say enough. I mean, maybe my School of the Future story didn't fully do it, but we will not put technology to good use without focusing on a lot of other things as well. And I want to just share one story about a teacher, actually. I could use any number of teachers, but I think one of the things that I just constantly think about whenever we get into this discussion of educational technology is what it actually takes to help put kids who face a whole lot of other challenges on a trajectory to true academic success. So I think about a teacher named Ivy Martinez, and this story is I remember it clearly because she was teaching fifth graders when I visited her classroom, and I had a fifth grader at the time. So I walk into her room, she's teaching in San Jose, one of the technology centers of the world, and I had heard she'd taught the same class of kids for 2 years. But I go in, and I was shocked. The first thing I saw was these fifth graders reading a novel and engaged in critical discourse of this novel that far surpassed anything going on in the classrooms of my fifth graders on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. A very diverse, but just a very, very different context economically, school. And, what I realized in further talking and spending time with Ivy is that when she started teaching her kids in fourth grade, they were reading at like the first, in some cases, the second grade level. And she had become really just outraged by the situation. She herself had grown up in a low-income community. She realized, oh my gosh, if I don't do something radically different, my kids are on path to no options in 10 years. So she reached out to the parents, and she started having meetings with each parent and their kids and just leveling with them and explaining to them, here's where you are, here's where this is going to lead to, but we can change it. If you work with me, we can change it. And she started getting her kids to come early and stay late, and she went about just maximizing every second of the day. If you spend time in her classroom, you realize, oh my gosh, like you never want to leave because this teacher's on such a mission. She's maximizing every second of the day. And sure enough, she had gotten her kids to, levels of academic excellence by like an absolute standard. But she had done a whole lot more than that. Like, I watched her kids sit in leadership circles, quote, every week they would sit in these circles and they'd give each other feedback on their leadership. I was sitting there thinking, if they did that in my fifth graders' classroom, it would just like be chaos. Like, people would just be snickering. They would think this was an absurd exercise. But she had invested her kids in the idea that they were going to have a tough road ahead, and they were going to have to fight for every inch of their education. She came into her room one day, sat down at the desk, handed out worksheets, and didn't do anything for 6 hours. The kids were confused, but they went along with it. She gets up and says, what did you think of today? And one kid said, I felt like another year, of school that I had before. And she said, you know what? You could run into this again. So let's talk. If you ever find yourself sitting in a class like this one, what are you going to do to ensure that you get an excellent education? So I tell this story just because I do think it is possible in the halls of South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, to get really caught up in how technology can solve all our problems. And it can be revolutionary, but it will never replace the need for an Ivy Martinez. Now, I also don't believe we're going to have we'll never have we have 1 million teachers in this country alone working with low-income kids. Getting to know Ivy, I think Ivy's one of the most inspirational people I've ever met, and I don't know if there are 1 million of her. I don't want to bank on that. What I've become very inspired about is the fact that a bunch of Ivies realize, you know what, we can set up schools differently, taking everything we learned at the classroom level, and we can make it possible for talented, committed teachers, but not superheroes, to meet the extra needs of their kids and put them on a different trajectory. We now have hundreds of schools that I would call transformational schools. They're all on a journey. They're not perfect, but they are making it possible for talented and committed, very hardworking teachers to actually ensure that their kids get a great education. Those are the schools that we should give incredible technology, like the Kopp School in Los Angeles.
Hey, Ms. Kopp. My name's Jeremy. I'm a TFA alum. And I remember a few years ago you went to the school I was working at and you spoke to me and a bunch of my colleagues about special ed and how Teach for America was supporting us. And I appreciate your passion for all this work, and thanks for coming to speak with us. But now, in terms of looking at it through the public view and sort of the educational landscape and sort of some of the debate that's gone on with TFA and Teach for All, my question is a worry about public education and privatization, the debate about some charter schools that might be for-profit and transparency with some of those schools, and just to get your take on how you view privatization in public schools. And in addition, how do you ask more of teachers while also sort of giving more to them? So I know that there's been merit pay debates, but how do you ask of teachers to do more without sort of going through policy to get more, raises that teachers sort of need?
Yeah. Well, first to the privatization thing. I mean, yeah, I woke up one day and realized all of a sudden we were corporate reformers working to privatize our public schools. And honestly, the whole premise, as you well know, of TFA was to say, we need to strengthen our public schools. But the first thing I did in my defense was write to the Secretary of Education at the time. I'm forgetting who it was, but it was the previous President Bush and the first. And I got a job rejection letter back in the mail and realized that wasn't going to work. So, but then I realized there are all these companies and they support maybe less worthy causes than this one. Maybe I'll get them to support Teach for America. So, Teach for America is largely privately funded. It's funded by contributions, 90% of which come from those 48 communities around the country, whose philanthropic individuals and corporations and foundations want to improve public education. And as a result, we are branded, corporate reformers who want to privatize education, which I just think is personally, I think it's unfortunate. As you say, I mean, I don't know anything. I mean, I should know more about the private companies that are running charter schools. I don't know them well because we haven't, we don't have extensive relationships with them. The vast majority of the people I know who are running charter schools weren't even starting out thinking, I really love charter schools. They were just looking for a way to innovate. I mean, to your last question, like to figure out how do we do what I think kids really need. So I personally believe that the public discussion right now is, I think it's very confusing for people who are not immersed in this stuff on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's very sad. It's very sad that we're wasting so much energy in this vitriolic debate rather than figuring out how do we embrace the things that will actually get results for kids. So if there is a for-profit charter school chain out there that is in fact getting great results for urban and rural kids, like gosh, the least of my worries is that a few people are making money off that. Like if in fact we're taking kids who I believe are in a life-threatening situation. I mean, most of our low-income kids do not have any shot. And so if someone who's, I don't know how many for-profit charter school organizations there are that are getting great results for low-income kids, but if they are, I think, until someone can figure out how to do it better, more cheaply, maybe that's okay.
So just a quick follow-up is about sort of unions and how, if you look at public education nationally, the vast majority work in public schools with collective bargaining agreements. I just think that overall that becomes, I know TFA wasn't meant to do that, but when you look at it because of the economic landscape and what's happened even in the last 5 or 6 years, many more relationships have been founded with charter schools. And then I feel like TFA becomes that you work with charter schools and you're supporting this private movement. While I know it wasn't supposed to be the fact, it's sort of what has happened for a lot of it. And I'm wondering how you feel about that.
Well, TFA is placing, first of all, we jump at every chance we get to place teachers in the regular system. Our teachers join the unions at the same rate as other new teachers. So that's one thing I'd say. It is true we've started placing in more charter schools. I don't even know the statistic, but I'm guessing it's a tiny, tiny fraction of those are for-profit charter schools. Almost all of them, I mean, at least 90% are nonprofit schools. So, you know, they're public schools, they're using public dollars. Some of them have their teachers in unions, some don't. And I think as the economy shifts again, maybe we'll be able to place more schools in the regular system as hiring picks up. But again, we don't want to be displacing other teachers. So where the vacancies are, we're gonna place our teachers.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Lori Anderson, and I'm a 2002 core member from inner city New Orleans. I taught math to students in 4.5. They had to invent a grade because they had so many students failing 4th grade, and that's who I taught. And I would just like to, first of all, thank you for that experience. To respond to the criticism that we don't have enough training as TFA teachers, I would just like to say that I absolutely felt equipped to handle that situation. And after just months of being in that situation, I was teaching behavior management to veteran teachers. So I loved that I had enough tools to be trained, but enough freedom to take my initiative and creativity and make something out of a really difficult situation. So I'd just like to thank you, because that has forever changed my life, the life of my daughters, the life of my family. I have a deep passion for education. So my question for you is, what are you going to do next? I mean, you are a trailblazer. You're inspiring. You've done Teach for America, Teach for All, but what is next? Are we going to the moon?
First of all, thank you for your commitment as a core member and your nice words. I think we're going to the moon. You know, when I set out, I mean, actually, I wasn't even thinking about global anything. I was thinking, as of, say, 8 years ago, about nothing but the immense issues that exist here in this country and how much more needs to be done. But I started meeting these very inspiring, committed social entrepreneurs from all over the world, from India to Lebanon to Chile to the next place, who were just determined for one reason or another. They were determined we gotta have Teach for India or Teach for Lebanon or whatever. And they were looking for help, and that ultimately led to this idea that we should have a network of these organizations that exist to help accelerate their development through, you know, providing direct support, but also providing platforms so that all of the staff and teachers and alumni around the world in these programs can learn from each other. And at some point, you know, along the way in the last 7 years, I just decided this is it for me. Like, this is gonna be my next 2 or 3 decades, because or maybe more, you know, depending on how long we'll live. You know, because you can't imagine the power of this, right? Like, to imagine all these programs, now in 30 countries, but soon to be, I mean, this is such a universal. Of course, we should be channeling our top talent against this issue. And soon we're gonna be in dozens and dozens and dozens of more countries, thanks to the initiative, again, of social entrepreneurs in those countries. But when you start imagining those efforts, I mean, what we've seen over the last 7 years in this is the same kind of magnetic power in terms of talent attraction. This exists all around the world. Thousands of people are vying for these positions all around the world. 13,000 people just applied to Teach for India, despite they're only recruiting from a few colleges. I was just in Colombia, where 2,300 people applied for 30 spots, Teach for Colombia. You know, so it attracts talent at an incredible level, and we've seen the same alumni effects. 60 to 70% of these folks staying in education beyond their 2 years. They're already proving to be incredible innovators. And what we've seen over the last 7 years in this is that this problem is so similar in its nature. Like that cycle I put up that's like, this is why we have this problem. This is true all around the world. And what that means, I mean, it's depressing. It means we're fighting the forces of gravity all around the world, because things look so similar from place to place, but you realize it means the solutions are shareable. So what I've seen over the last 7 years is that, you know, these programs are channeling their top talent against a very similar problem in diverse cultures that inspire different ways of thinking, which means lots of innovation and is part of a global network where people are sharing solutions. So I really do believe we will soon have a thriving movement all over the world to ensure educational opportunity for all. I think it'll be moving a lot more quickly because we're all learning from each other. So that's my big rest of life plan, and I feel very lucky to be working alongside many other colleagues in this as well.
Well, blaze on. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, Ms. Kopp. As a traditionally trained teacher, I think one of the best things that Teach for America does is puts future policymakers in the classroom and gives them kind of a vision of what that life is. Though I am still scared of the revolving door kind of effect. My question is, what kind of balance do you see between Teach for America and traditionally trained teachers? What percentage of America in your ideal world would be TFA teachers and what would be traditionally trained teachers? And what can we learn from each other?
Great question. You know, we have never conceived of, still don't conceive of, never will Teach for America as, you know, even a model for other teacher training programs, honestly. I mean, I think other people maybe have held us up as that, but we certainly haven't. Like, what we're trying to do, as I articulated before, is, you know, cultivate a force of people who will work ultimately at every level of the education system, at every level of policy, and across sectors to take this issue on. And, you know, Teach for America, I mean, who knows where its growth plans will go, but there are 350,000, maybe, I don't know how out of date that statistic is, 350,000 to 400,000 new teachers a year. We're 5,000 to 6,000 of them. We're not going to expand that dramatically. I mean, again, I'm not really ultimately making that call right now, but it doesn't seem to be in the cards. So I guess that's one thing I would say. You know, I think we should all be working together, and we are working together, thankfully, you know, maybe more than folks know within communities. You know, we're partnering with schools of education in every community in which we work to try to figure out how do we better, you know, how do we bring what we've learned, and we have learned a lot just through our relationship with our teachers, and what we've learned differentiates the most successful of them. But how can we take what we've learned in traditional schools of education and in school districts themselves to strengthen the way all new teachers are prepared. So we need a lot more, you know, collaboration like that. And I know the Teach for America people are out there, you know, trying to strengthen those partnerships for sure.
Thank you.
Hi, Wendy. My name is Varun, and I was a New Orleans core member in 2010, and I'm a co-founder of UClass. And I am a huge believer in Teach for America's mission, and granted, I was very excited with the lineup for South by Southwest because you were speaking, and also one of my favorites, Diane Ravitch, was speaking as well. And I think a lot of core members are in my shoes where we both empathize with what Diane Ravitch is saying, but also we are believers in Teach for America's mission. So going to Diane Ravitch's session, I noticed that there was a lot of dialogue, well, a lot of myths that were being perpetuated about Teach for America. And I noticed that this also informs the public opinion where a lot of people conceive of Diane Ravitch on one end of a spectrum and Teach for America / Michelle Rhee on another end of the spectrum. But coming into today's presentation, I see what I've always believed, which is there's a lot of commonality. What you're saying was actually not that different than what Diane Ravitch was saying. So my question is kind of twofold. One is, what does Teach for America do to dispel the myths that are perpetuated about the organization? And second, what do you see as the future of the dialogue of education reform / what can we do to help further that dialogue?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, I've had similar reflections myself. I mean, I did a panel discussion a couple summers ago at one of the Aspen Institute programs with Diane Ravitch, and you know, the whole thing was just everyone agreeing with each other. She even left and right after the panel said, wow, we agree on everything. But then the next day she tweeted how outrageous the things I said were and put out a lot of things that I hadn't said, you know. And so that's, I think we need to hold ourselves to a high standard. I mean, we have an incredible privilege in this country of being able to work in such a fulfilling sector and to be able to work with kids who have incredible potential. And I think we need to keep ourselves super centered in acting with total integrity and deep commitment to those kids. So I think if we do that, all of us in this room and everyone outside of this room, and just hold ourselves to that standard, you know, I think we can change the public discussion. Right now, the public discussion is dominated by a few voices. I think Teach for America's hasn't been that strong. I think people think Michelle Rhee is Teach for America's voice, but Michelle Rhee is a Teach for America alum alongside many others who have very different views from each other. And I think if I have a reflection about the last, I mean, I have many reflections about the last, say, decade of Teach for America, but one of them is we just didn't invest in figuring out how to actually build the communications capacity that would be necessary given how politically kind of volatile this issue is that we're addressing. And I think Teach for America is working actively to change that. Matt and Elisa are trying to, you know, get their voices out there and encourage many other voices in the TFA community to make their voices heard, because we think that we can be a force for moderation, you know, and just truth, you know, and so I think we need to do more, all of us, to make our voices heard. I mean, we can't leave this to a few voices dominating the discussion.
Thank you. I'll start blogging.
Great. Yeah. Okay, 3 or 4 minutes, so maybe 2 last questions.
Hi, Wendy. I'm Ben Kramer, Core Member 91.
Hi, Ben.
Hi. I was actually Teach for America's first deferral. I deferred in 1990 to go teach in Greece. So in some ways, I predicted Teach for All.
Hey, you need to come to Teach for All.
My question, you've talked a lot about the similarities in what you found in the international perspective. What are the big revelations that you found as you cast your gaze across the world, and how does it inform practice here in the United States?
That's such a good question. And there's such a danger in focusing on the similarity point because, of course, you know, we've got such diversity around the world. You know, well, I mean, one thing I'll say, I mean, we had the chance to take the 32 leaders of the Teach for All organizations to Shanghai this past fall to engage with the kind of people who've driven the really quite radical change in the Shanghai education system over the last 2 decades. This system has gone from being one of significant disparities. There's a not insignificant migrant population in Shanghai, to one that has, as we all know, according to the PISA, at least the highest levels of equity and excellence in the world. And, you know, it was fascinating to listen to what they articulated because, you know, I think there were a lot of assumptions. I myself, you know, probably had them going in thinking, you know, how much of this is about the culture of the folks in Shanghai? How much of it is about the government control and, you know, you can say to do something and everyone just does it. You know, what was it? And yet, you know, to hear these folks who had driven this change talk, it was very affirming actually of you know, what we know is at work in the highest performing situations in the US. I mean, first of all, actually, one interesting note is that this man who had kind of who's often put out as the person who's led the change, he says that the #1 factor in Shanghai's evolution was their, quote, open door policy. He said, you know, we sent our educators around the world, and that drove a shift in pedagogical practice. And I just think that's fascinating, right? Because we do not send our educators around the world. We do not think about the rest of the world in the US. At least that's been my experience. And I think we could do so much by embracing what there is to be learned from other countries. Secondly, though, this man's passionate commitment to equity and his ability through his incredible charisma, among other things, and deep conviction to convince everyone that our most privileged kids are much better off when we have our most disadvantaged kids learning alongside them and achieving at high levels. And he articulates why he believes that is, and then they went through a huge series of policies to actually create a truly equitable system. The other things that were just really of note, two last things. I mean, one, they embraced a different set of curricular standards. They teach to a very rigorous set of standards. You know, counter to, I think, many of our, you know, perceptions of the rote system in China. They have standards that, you know, really encourage and promote and require critical thinking. And secondly, and maybe, I mean, I think it's interesting for us to all note, I mean, they have embedded teacher professional development so deeply within the regular school day. You know, he said, you know, to our group, he said, you know, we don't believe in the idea of extraordinary teachers. We're going to take ordinary people and turn them into extraordinary teachers. I probably botched the quote, but you get the idea. Like, he's saying we're going to take ordinary people and we're going to develop them into extraordinary teachers. And I think, you know, whenever I've spent time in a truly outstanding school, that's what they are doing. And I just think that that holds a lot of lessons for us here when we think about truly how do we strengthen the teaching profession.
Hi, my name is Christian Wiebel, and I'm over product innovation at a company called Agilix out of Utah. And our focus is on supporting student-centered and personalized learning through a product platform. And one of our products called Buzz is being used in partnership with the School Improvement Network by the Education Achievement Authority in Detroit. And that's a pretty tough environment. It's a turnaround effort, and so there's a lot going on there. And as I've interacted with the teachers from Teach for America that are in that location, I've been extremely impressed with what they're doing, the successes that they're having as they get through challenges with technology and implementing new programs. My question for you is Teach for America capturing stories of teachers like this and that we can learn from, and where would we find those? And in particular, do you have, you know, video documentaries and things like that?
You know, we should probably be doing a lot better. I mean, I'm often puzzling on this, and maybe some of you in the audience can help out with this dilemma, but, you know, there's so much that we've learned in the last, you know, decade, let alone 24 years in this, and there's so much good stuff happening in urban and rural communities across the country, and I think very few people actually realize that or have any form of accurate understanding of what has happened. And, you know, again, I think Teach for America is a bunch of people who kind of put their head down and do the work in the face of really serious kind of, again, life important issues for kids, and we probably haven't done enough to get the word out and spread the message. So anyone who wants to help in that, we welcome the help.
Well, thank you so much for what you're doing. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.